What's up, guys? So the Senate agreed on a stimulus package, and surprise, surprise, it's a giant bailout for corporations while leaving just enough for the average American so they maybe don't lose everything they've ever had. We're going to get into it today on The Driven Progressive. So the Senate passed a bill 96-0, and here are some of the key takeaways. $1,200 per person to anybody that makes $75,000 or less, to be phased out up to $100,000. Also $500 per child, and naturally $2,400 to couples, to be phased out up to $200,000. And that'll be based on 2018 tax info. Also a $600 increase to all state unemployment benefits. That means anybody making less than $75,000 will get 100% of their pay. And it also includes gig workers, furloughed workers, freelancers, and independent contractors. All something that would have been possible under the previous bill. The bill also includes $350 billion for small businesses and what's being called forgivable loans, which will be forgiven if they maintain their payroll. That's a lifeline for millions of businesses. It'll be run through the Small Business Administration. It also includes $150 billion for hospitals, $9.5 billion for the Department of Agriculture, $10.5 billion for the Department of Defense, including $1.4 billion for deployments of the National Guard, and $1 billion for the Defense Production Act to help fast-track production of needed medical supplies and combat the coronavirus. $5 billion for community developing block grants, $45 billion for FEMA disaster relief, $11 billion for the development of vaccines, $400 million to help states prepare for the elections, and $3 billion to help more than 4.5 million low-income households in the HUD assistance housing to avoid eviction. So that's all the stuff. That's pretty much all the stuff for workers and some discretionary stuff. But by far the worst part of this bill is the giant corporate bailout. And I'm sure the number you've heard reported is $500 billion. It's not even close, because $425 billion of that $500 billion can be leveraged 10x. That means it's essentially a $4.25 trillion bailout. And unlike what is for workers and what is for small businesses, that's all means tested and has all these stipulations tied to it. All these companies have to do is call up the Federal Reserve and they get made whole instantly. And not only that, but Boeing's CEO said he wouldn't even take the money if there was any strings attached to it. Doesn't really sound like he's that hard up for money now, does it? Also, of the free cash flow of the last 10 years, airlines have spent 96% of it on stock buybacks. So all they've done is buy back their own stock with all their free cash flow the last 10 years. And now that they have a bad couple weeks, they get to just get made whole instantly from the Federal Reserve. What a way to live. Not to mention, the only stipulations they got for companies that get bailouts is that they can't buy back stock for a year, they can't raise CEO pay for a year, and they can't fire their workers for a whole 6 months. I mean, can you believe this shit? Also, because everything for workers is means tested, it might take as long as 4 months to get your check if you don't have direct deposit. I mean, how is this acceptable? I mean, we're rolling out the red carpet for giant corporations. All they have to do is call up the Federal Reserve and they get funding immediately. Meanwhile, the guy who can't pay his fucking rent because he got laid off has to wait possibly 4 months. Only 70 million people have direct deposit with the IRS. That's not even 25% of the country. And you're going to make them wait up to 4 months because you have to means test it. Why not, instead of means testing everything, why don't you just take it back in taxes next year or something? Anybody over $100,000 has to pay the $1,200 back. There, you can send checks out to everybody. I mean, this bullshit about not wanting to send checks to people like Mike Bloomberg or something, it's just ridiculous. People need money. The first is coming up. And this doesn't cover everybody. This doesn't cover the people that are going to get hurt the most, the people that deal in cash, the people that don't have direct deposit, what about somebody that didn't have a good 2019? If somebody lost their job in 2019, they're going to be fucked by this package. I mean, it's just ridiculous that something like this can pass. And the only reason it did pass is because, like AOC said here in a tweet, just a reminder that there is absolutely no good reason why Senate Republicans are tying an historic corporate giveaway to getting relief money in the hands of families. They could just authorize sending checks to families today, right now, and deal with the rest, but they refuse. And if that don't sum it up for you, I don't know what will. As the old saying goes, never let a good crisis go to waste. And what did they do? They used this pandemic to tie together relief for Americans with bailouts for giant corporations that'll just result in the rich getting richer, just like in 2008. But they made it impossible for anybody to vote against this, because if you show opposition to it, you're the guy that took money out of the hands of the Americans. You have to live with that. You will get the worst press in the world, and all the leadership will point at you like, this is the person that stopped people from getting money. When they could just as easily put a bill together that was just to help people out and just to give checks to people. They didn't have to tie in all the stuff for corporations. They could have easily done that in two different bills. But no, they used all their might and leadership to tie together both of these things, and this is what happens. You get basically scraps for Americans, and you get $4.5 trillion for corporations. Why? Because they put these people in office. They're the ones that put Nancy Pelosi in office. They're the ones that put Mitch McConnell in office, Steny Hoyer, all these fucking fossils that do nothing for us. And then when a crisis comes, they take that opportunity to completely bail out corporate America and make them even wealthier than they already are. Meanwhile, making everybody who makes $75,000 or less beg and plead and call and do paperwork and every single thing, and 4 months later they might get a check that might help them out. Absolutely fucking ridiculous. Also, even though the bill clearly didn't go far enough, in a last-ditch effort to be the biggest pieces of shit in the world, Lindsey Graham, Ben Sasse, and Rick Scott offered up an amendment that would cut the amount of unemployment benefit that would be in the bill, calling it too generous. Luckily, Bernie threatened to kill the bill altogether if they didn't drop their objection, and it ended up staying the way it was. So if you're keeping score at home, that's $4.25 trillion for corporations, just fine. A couple extra dollars in unemployment benefits for working Americans, too generous. Also, Lindsey Graham doesn't understand that you don't get unemployment benefits if you quit your job. Like, you have to be laid off. So, yeah. But the funniest, well, not the funniest, but the best part about this whole thing was Bernie's speech on the floor last night. Thank you, Bernie, for saving that part, by the way, because it is the best part of this entire bill. Let's check that out.
And now I find that some of my Republican colleagues are very distressed. They're very upset that somebody who's making 10, 12 bucks an hour might end up with a paycheck for 4 months more than they received last week. Oh my God, the universe is collapsing. Imagine that. Somebody who's making 12 bucks an hour, now like the rest of us, faces an unprecedented economic crisis with the 600 bucks on top of their regular unemployment check, might be making a few bucks more for 4 months. Oh my word! Will the universe survive?
Ladies and gentlemen, the real advocate for the American worker, Bernie motherfucking Sanders. While Joe Biden's going on TV and getting lost in interviews, Bernie Sanders has been on the floor every day fighting like hell to get everything he can for workers. Now, unemployment benefit might have gotten canceled if it wouldn't have been for Bernie. I mean, it wouldn't have got canceled completely, but it would have been way less. Bernie used a ton of political capital yesterday and threatened to veto this bill, which would have made him look like a serious evil villain to a lot of people. Not people in the know, but a lot of the country would have been pointing at Bernie saying he killed this bill. But he stood up and got that unemployment benefit in there. He was on the floor last night fighting for us. And we have to remember this. We have to remember, and we have to show people, we have to keep telling people who fought for us at this time. Look at AOC, she's been very outspoken. Look at Bernie, he's been very outspoken. Where's Joe Biden been? Where's Elizabeth Warren been? Where are all these so-called progressives been? Elizabeth Warren had a couple good ideas, yeah, but where's she been at? She hasn't been out there publicly going against this bill, threatening to veto things or threaten to go against it if he doesn't get things for workers. No, nobody has. Because that's what they do. They throw in all this extra shit and say, I dare you to vote against it. You can't vote against our giant corporate bailout because it has scraps for workers in there. And if you vote against it, I'll say you're against workers. Well, while I understand that Bernie kind of had to vote for it, I'm glad that he stood up at least as much as he did. I would have liked to have gotten more, but it's just unfortunately, because all the power is still with the corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans. There were a few populists on the Republican side, like Josh Hawley, who actually fought for more stuff for workers and regular people. But ultimately, it didn't get passed. Let's remember this time. Let's remember who fought for us, who didn't fight for us, and who completely sold out. Because unfortunately, like usual, it was pretty much all the Democrats and pretty much all the Republicans that at the end of the day only cared about corporations and fed the American people the scraps that were left over. Alright guys, that's going to do it for me. Be sure to subscribe if you like the content. Follow me on my Instagram at Driven Progressive. Let me know in the comments down below what videos you would like to see. I'm trying to find my niche here, so let me know what you'd like to see more of on YouTube or on social media period as far as progressive politics goes. Thanks a lot for checking it out. Peace.